The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Riverside Community Center as Eleanor Chen pushed open the heavy wooden doors. She carried a worn canvas bag over her shoulder and wore a faded blue cardigan that had seen better days. Her gray hair was pulled back into a simple bun and her shoes were practical, not fashionable. At 62, she had the kind of face that smiled easily, with gentle wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of a life well lived. The reception desk was empty, so Eleanor stood there for a moment, taking in the old building. She could hear piano music coming from somewhere down the hall. It was a student playing, she could tell. The notes were careful, measured, with that particular hesitancy that comes from someone still learning to trust their fingers. "Can I help you?" A voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned to see a woman in her 40s, dressed in an elegant black pantsuit with perfectly styled auburn hair. She had the look of someone important, someone who knew it. "Oh, hello. I'm Eleanor. I'm here about the volunteer position. For the music program?" The woman's eyes traveled from Eleanor's face down to her simple clothes and back up again. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Not quite disappointment, but close. "Ah, yes, I'm Victoria Hartwell. I run the music department here." She extended her hand and Eleanor shook it warmly. "It's wonderful to meet you, Ms. Hartwell. Please call me Victoria, though most of the staff use my full name." She glanced at her watch. "You're right on time." "That's good. Follow me and I'll show you around." They walked down the corridor, past practice rooms where Eleanor could see young students bent over their instruments. The building had good bones, she thought. High ceilings, nice acoustics. It reminded her of places she'd known in another life. But she pushed that thought away gently. Victoria led her into a large room filled with instruments, sheet music scattered across tables and a beautiful grand piano sitting in the corner. A tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses stood organizing folders. He looked up as they entered. "James, this is Eleanor, our new volunteer." Victoria's tone was pleasant but matter-of-fact. "Eleanor, this is James Preston. He teaches advanced piano and theory." James smiled politely and shook Eleanor's hand. His grip was firm but brief. "Welcome aboard. We can always use extra hands around here." "Thank you. I'm happy to help however I can." Victoria walked over to one of the tables and gestured at the chaos of papers. "As you can see, we're a bit disorganized at the moment. We have a big charity concert coming up in 2 months and things get hectic. Your main job will be keeping the sheet music organized, making sure the practice rooms are tidy, and helping with general administrative tasks." Eleanor nodded, setting her bag down on a chair. "That sounds perfect. Have you had any musical training yourself?" James asked, leaning against the piano. The question seemed casual, almost an afterthought. "A little bit here and there," Eleanor said with a modest smile. "Nothing special." Victoria and James exchanged a quick glance. "Well, you don't need to be a musician to help us organize," Victoria said kindly. "In fact, sometimes it's better to have someone who can focus on the practical side of things without getting distracted by the artistic temperaments." She laughed lightly. At her own joke, Eleanor spent the next hour receiving instructions. She learned where the cleaning supplies were kept, how they liked the sheet music filed, and which practice rooms needed the most attention. Victoria and James were professional, even warm at times, but there was something in the way they spoke to her, like they were explaining things to a child, or someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexity of what they did. During a break, Eleanor found herself alone in the main music room. She walked slowly around the perimeter, her fingers trailing along the edge of a bookshelf filled with music theory books. She stopped at the grand piano, its black surface gleaming in the afternoon light. Without thinking, she reached out and gently touched the keys. She didn't press them, just felt their familiar smoothness under her fingertips. "It's a beautiful instrument, isn't it?" James had returned, carrying a stack of folders. "A Steinway. It's our pride and joy here. We saved for 3 years to afford it." "It's magnificent," Eleanor said softly, pulling her hand back. "Do you play at all? Even just for fun?" "Oh, I used to. A long time ago." She turned away from the piano, picking up a cloth to dust the music stands instead. As the day went on, Eleanor settled into her tasks. She organized the chaos of sheet music into neat stacks, swept the practice rooms, and even made a fresh pot of coffee in the break room. She hummed quietly while she worked, not loudly enough to disturb anyone, just a gentle melody that kept her company. At one point, She passed by a practice room where Victoria was giving a lesson to a teenage girl. The girl was struggling with a difficult passage, her frustration evident in the set of her shoulders. Eleanor paused for just a moment, listening. She could hear exactly where the girl was going wrong, which finger positions were causing the problem, but she said nothing. She moved on with her cleaning supplies. Later that afternoon, Victoria and James sat in the small office they shared, reviewing schedules for the upcoming concert. Eleanor had gone to organize supplies in the storage closet down the hall. "She seems nice enough," James said, typing on his laptop. "Very sweet. A bit like my aunt, actually. Always volunteering, wants to stay busy after retirement." Victoria sipped her tea, though I'm not sure how much musical insight we can expect from her. "Did you hear her humming earlier?" "It was enthusiastic," James chuckled. "Well, we need someone to handle the practical things. The last volunteer quit because they wanted to give input on programming choices. Sometimes it's better to have someone who's just happy to help without expectations." "True. And she seems perfectly content to clean and organize. That's actually ideal." They continued their planning, discussing which students would perform at the concert and which pieces would make the best impression on the wealthy donors they hoped to attract. Meanwhile, Eleanor finished organizing the storage closet and stood for a moment in the quiet hallway. Through the walls, she could hear the muffled sounds of students practicing. Each one was at a different level, working through their own challenges. She smiled to herself, that same gentle smile that seemed to be her default expression. This was exactly what she had wanted when she'd moved to this small town 6 months ago, a quiet place where nobody knew her, where she could simply be helpful without any fuss or attention. She'd seen the volunteer posting at the library and felt drawn to it immediately. Music had been her whole life once, but now she wanted something different, something simple and uncomplicated. As she gathered her things to leave for the day, Victoria found her in the hallway. "Eleanor, thank you for today. You've already made such a difference. Same time tomorrow. I'll be here," Eleanor promised. Walking to her car in the parking lot, Eleanor felt peaceful. The autumn air was crisp and the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She had found a place where she could be useful, where she could be around music without the pressure and expectations that had filled her previous life. She didn't need anyone to know who she had been. That person belonged to the past. Now she was just Eleanor, the volunteer who cleaned pianos and organized sheet music. And that was exactly enough. Tomorrow she would return and continue her simple tasks, invisible in the best possible way. She had no idea that in just a few days everything would change. 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor started volunteering at the community center. She had fallen into a comfortable routine, arriving each morning at 9 and staying until the afternoon students finished their lessons. The sheet music was now impeccably organized. The practice room sparkled, and she'd even started a system for tracking which instruments needed maintenance. Victoria and James had warmed to her considerably. She made excellent coffee, never complained, and had a calming presence that seemed to settle the chaos that naturally surrounded any music program. She was exactly what they'd hoped for in a volunteer. On a Tuesday morning, Victoria called an all-staff meeting in the main rehearsal hall. Eleanor arrived with her usual quiet punctuality, taking a seat in the back row. The room filled with teachers, assistants, and even some of the senior students who helped with the younger children's classes. Victoria stood at the front, holding a clipboard and wearing her customary professional smile. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, our annual charity concert is now just 6 weeks away. This year we've managed to secure the Grand Theater downtown, which seats 500 people. Excited murmurs rippled through the room. The Grand Theater was a big deal. It meant important donors, potential press coverage, and a chance to really put the community center's music program on the map. "The mayor's office has confirmed attendance," James added, standing beside Victoria. "We'll also have representatives from the Arts Council and several prominent local businesses. This is our opportunity to showcase what we do here." Victoria consulted her clipboard. "We need to finalize our performance roster today. Each staff member will perform something, including our teaching assistants and volunteers. It's important that everyone contributes to make this a true community effort." Eleanor felt a small flutter in her stomach but kept her expression neutral. She'd expected something like this might happen eventually. For the next 30 minutes, the group discussed the program. Teachers claimed their pieces, Students were assigned their performances, and the event began to take shape. Victoria worked her way down the list methodically, checking off names and time slots. Finally, she reached the bottom of her list. And that brings us to our volunteers. Eleanor, you're our only volunteer staff member right now. Have you thought about what you might like to contribute? All eyes turned to Eleanor. She felt the weight of their attention but kept her composure. I'm happy to help in whatever way is most useful. Perhaps I could introduce performers or help with stage management. James laughed, not unkindly. Oh, come now. Everyone performs something. It's tradition. Even if it's just a simple piece. Nothing fancy required. How about Mary Had a Little Lamb? Suggested Peter, one of the younger teachers. Several people chuckled. Or maybe Chopsticks. My 6-year-olds play that one. Eleanor smiled gently. I suppose I could try something a bit more challenging than that if you'd like. The room fell quiet for a moment. Victoria exchanged a glance with James, her eyebrows slightly raised. There was something almost amusing in the air. A shared thought passing between the teachers that Eleanor was overestimating her abilities. More challenging? Victoria asked carefully. What did you have in mind? Well, I'm not sure exactly. What would you suggest? James walked over to the bookshelf where they kept the repertoire for reference. He pulled out a few books, flipping through them. Let's see. For someone with limited experience, maybe a simple Mozart sonata. The C major one is quite approachable. Or perhaps a Schumann piece from the album for the young. Those are designed for students. Those would be lovely, Eleanor said. Whatever you think is appropriate. There was something in her tone, though she couldn't have said what exactly. That caught Victoria's attention. It wasn't defiance or pride. It was just a quiet confidence that didn't quite match the humble volunteer they'd come to know. You know what? Victoria said, and there was a slight edge to her voice now, though she kept smiling. I think Eleanor is being modest. She said she wants something challenging. Let's give her something challenging. James looked at her curiously. Victoria, I don't think… No. She asked for it. Victoria walked to the piano where several scores were stacked. She rifled through them deliberately, passing over intermediate pieces, passing over advanced pieces until she found what she was looking for. She pulled out a thick, well-worn score and held it up. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor. The room went completely silent. Even the students who didn't know much about classical piano recognized that name. It was legendary, brutally difficult. The kind of piece that professional concert pianists spent months preparing. Peter let out a low whistle. Victoria, that's exactly what Eleanor asked for, Victoria finished, walking toward Eleanor with the score. Something challenging. This is one of the most technically demanding pieces in the entire piano repertoire. 30 minutes long, requires incredible stamina, and has passages that move so quickly your fingers have to be absolutely precise or the whole thing falls apart. She held the score out to Eleanor, who looked at it calmly. Of course, if it's too much, we completely understand. You can stick with the Mozart. No one would judge you. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation. Some of the teachers looked uncomfortable, as if Victoria had gone too far. Others were clearly curious to see how Eleanor would respond. Eleanor reached out and took the score. She looked at the cover, then opened it, her eyes scanning the first page of music. The notes were dense, complex, filling every inch of the staff lines. For a moment, she was very still. I understand this was Vladimir Horowitz's favorite piece to perform, she said quietly, almost to herself. Victoria blinked. You know about Horowitz? I've heard his recordings. They're quite beautiful. Eleanor closed the score and looked up at Victoria with that same gentle smile. If you really think I should try this, I'd be happy to give it my best effort. James stepped forward, his expression genuinely concerned now. Eleanor, I don't think you understand. This isn't just difficult. Professional pianists sometimes refuse to perform this piece. It's called one of the most impossible pieces ever written. Rachmaninoff himself said it was too hard. I understand it's challenging, Eleanor said simply, but I'd like to try. If I can't manage it, I'll let you know in plenty of time to adjust the program. Victoria's smile had become fixed, somewhere between satisfaction and disbelief. Well, all right then. You have 6 weeks. The practice rooms are available for your use, obviously. Do you need help finding a recording to listen to? Thank you, but I'll manage. The meeting concluded shortly after, but the energy in the room had shifted. As people filed out, Eleanor could hear the whispers, the barely contained laughter. She heard someone say, "This is going to be a disaster," and someone else respond, "Should we have a backup plan?" James approached her as she gathered her things. His face was kind but worried. "Eleanor, listen. There's no shame in changing your mind. We can find you something appropriate." Victoria was just, "She gets competitive sometimes, but nobody expects you to actually perform that piece." "I appreciate your concern, James, really I do, but I'd like to try." He sighed. "All right, but please, if it becomes too much, speak up. We don't want you to feel pressured." That evening, as Eleanor drove home, she thought about the score sitting on the passenger seat beside her. She thought about Victoria's challenging smile, about the whispers and the assumptions. Most of all, she thought about whether she was doing the right thing. She had come here to be anonymous, to be simple, to escape the weight of expectations. And now she'd accepted the most demanding piano piece in the standard repertoire. The very piece she'd performed to win the Van Cliburn competition 40 years ago. But something in Victoria's condescension had stirred something in her. Not anger exactly, just a quiet reminder that she was more than what people saw on the surface. Maybe everyone needed that reminder sometimes. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at her small house with its neat garden and simple life. Tomorrow she would begin practicing. And then they would see, not because she needed to prove anything to them, but because once, a long time ago, she had promised herself she would never let anyone make her feel small. That promise, it seemed, still mattered. The first strange thing happened on a Thursday night, almost a week after Eleanor had accepted the challenge. Ben Rodriguez, the night security guard, was making his usual rounds through the community center at 11:30. The building was supposed to be empty, locked up since 9. He checked each hallway with his flashlight, making sure all the doors were secure and the lights were off. Then he heard it. Piano music, coming from the practice room wing. At first, he thought someone had left a recording playing. But as he got closer, he realized this was live. Someone was actually in there playing, and not just playing. The music was extraordinary, flowing through the empty hallways like water, filling every corner with sound that made the hair on his arms stand up. He walked quietly toward practice room 3, where the music was coming from. The door was closed, but light showed through the gap at the bottom. Ben hesitated. Should he interrupt? Technically, no one was supposed to be here. But the music was so beautiful he felt guilty even thinking about stopping it. He knocked gently. The music stopped immediately. "Hello? Security, is someone in there?" The door opened, and Eleanor stood there, looking slightly flustered. She wore the same simple clothes she always did, and her hair was coming loose from its bun. "Oh, Ben, I'm so sorry. I should have told you I'd be here late. Ms. Eleanor, I didn't know you had a key to the building. Victoria gave me one last week so I could practice outside of regular hours. I hope the music didn't disturb you." Ben shook his head, still trying to process what he'd heard. "That was you playing just now?" "Yes, I'm preparing for the concert, and that was... I mean, I don't know much about piano, but that sounded professional." Eleanor smiled, that same gentle smile she always wore. "You're kind to say so. I'm just doing my best. I should probably call it a night anyway." She gathered her things and left, saying goodnight to Ben in the parking lot. He stood there for a moment, watching her old sedan pull away, completely confused. The elderly volunteer who cleaned and organized was the one making that incredible music. It didn't make sense. The next morning, he mentioned it to Rita, the receptionist. "I'm telling you, it was like nothing I've ever heard." And it was her. "Sweet old Eleanor," Rita laughed. "Maybe she's better than we thought. Or maybe you're going soft, Ben. Getting romantic about piano music at your age." But Ben wasn't the only one who'd noticed something odd. Over the next 2 weeks, whispers started circulating among the students. Lily Chen, a 17-year-old piano student who'd been at the center for 5 years, was the first to really pay attention. She'd stayed late one evening to practice for her college auditions, and had heard music coming from Eleanor's usual practice room. Curious, she'd walked down the hall and peeked through the small window in the door. What she saw made her stop breathing for a moment. Eleanor's hands were moving across the keys so fast they were almost a blur. The music was complex, layered, the kind of thing Lily had only heard in concert halls when her parents took her to see professionals. Lily ducked away before Eleanor could see her, her heart pounding. She went back to her own practice room but couldn't focus. That night she couldn't stop thinking about what she'd witnessed. The next day, She tried to peek again, but Eleanor must have sensed someone watching because she stopped playing immediately and got up to adjust the curtain over the window. After that, she kept the curtain closed during her practice sessions, but other students started noticing too. Kevin Wu, who studied violin, swore he heard Rachmaninoff coming from Eleanor's practice room. The real deal, he told his friends. Not someone stumbling through it, actually playing it. There's no way, his friend Thomas said. That's Eleanor. She makes coffee and organizes sheet music. She's nice, but come on. I know what I heard. The rumors reached Victoria and James during a lunch break. They were eating sandwiches in the office when Peter, the young teacher, stuck his head in. Have you guys heard what the students are saying about Eleanor? What now? Victoria asked, not looking up from her computer. They think she's some kind of secret concert pianist. Apparently she's playing Rachmaninoff like a professional. James laughed. The students have active imaginations. That's what I thought too. But Ben said the same thing. He heard her practicing late one night and said it was incredible. Victoria finally looked up, a slight frown on her face. Ben thinks every street musician is incredible. He cried during our Christmas recital last year when the beginners played Jingle Bells. True, Peter admitted. But still, aren't you curious? About what? Whether our 62-year-old volunteer who can barely work a computer is secretly Vladimir Horowitz? No, Peter, I'm not curious. Victoria's tone had an edge to it. Eleanor is a sweet woman who's trying very hard to do something nice. Let's not make her feel self-conscious. But despite her words, Victoria did find herself walking past practice room 3 more often. She never heard anything unusual. Eleanor always seemed to stop playing whenever someone approached, switching to organizing her music or taking a water break. 2 weeks before the concert, James finally decided to check on Eleanor's progress. He knocked on her practice room door one afternoon. Eleanor, do you have a moment? She opened the door, looking pleased to see him. Of course, James, come in. He entered the small room. The Rachmaninoff score was open on the piano, covered with pencil marks and notes. I wanted to see how you're doing with the piece. You know, we're running out of time. If you need to switch to something simpler, now would be the time to make that call. That's thoughtful of you, Eleanor said. But I think I'll stick with it. Would you mind playing a bit for me, just so I know where you are with it? Eleanor hesitated, and for a moment James saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty? No, something else. Something he couldn't quite name. I'd prefer to wait until the concert if that's all right. I'm still working through some difficult sections and I'd rather present the complete piece. James tried not to show his concern. In his experience, when students didn't want to play for you, it meant they were struggling badly. Eleanor, I need to be honest. I'm worried you're setting yourself up for embarrassment. This piece is brutal. There's no shame in... I understand your concern, Eleanor interrupted gently, but I'd really like to try. After James left, Eleanor sat down at the piano and stared at the keys. She knew what they thought. She'd heard the whispers, seen the pitying looks. They expected her to fail spectacularly. Part of her wanted to tell them the truth right now, to explain who she was, what she'd done, the concerts she'd played in every major hall in the world. But another part of her, the part that had moved to this small town seeking peace, wanted to keep that life separate. She had spent 40 years being Eleanor Chen, the pianist. She'd been on magazine covers, done interviews, taught at the most prestigious music schools. She'd been recognized in airports and restaurants. Her recordings had won awards. Critics had written thousands of words analyzing her technique, and she'd walked away from all of it 5 years ago when her husband died. She'd wanted to disappear, to be normal, to just exist without the pressure and the expectations. But Victoria's challenge had awakened something. Not pride exactly. More like a reminder that you couldn't run from who you were forever. Meanwhile, Lily had been doing research. Late one night, unable to sleep, she'd been scrolling through classical music videos on her phone. She'd typed in Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto 3, just to hear what the piece was supposed to sound like. That's when she found it. A video from 1985. The Van Cliburn International Piano Competition, one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world. The title read, Eleanor Chen performs Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 3, first prize winner. Lily clicked on it, her hands shaking slightly. The woman on the screen was 40 years younger, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, wearing an elegant black gown, but the face was unmistakable. It was Eleanor. Their Eleanor, the volunteer who made coffee and cleaned piano keys. And she was magnificent. Her hands flew across the keys with impossible precision. The music soared and thundered, delicate one moment and powerful the next. The audience erupted in applause that lasted for minutes. Lily sat in her bed, stunned, watching the video 3 more times. She looked up more information. Eleanor Chen, graduate of Juilliard, professor of piano at Juilliard for 23 years, multiple international awards, recordings with major orchestras, tours across 5 continents. How is this even possible? Why would someone with that background be here? Volunteering at a small community center, letting people treat her like she didn't know anything about music. Lily's finger hovered over the share button. She could send this to everyone, could let them all know. But something stopped her. Eleanor clearly didn't want people to know. She'd had plenty of chances to mention her background and hadn't. There had to be a reason. Lily closed her phone and lay in the darkness, thinking. In less than 2 weeks, Eleanor would walk onto that stage, and everyone would find out anyway. She decided to keep the secret, at least for now. Some stories, she thought, were better when they unfolded in their own time. The night of the charity concert arrived with the kind of anticipation that makes your stomach flutter. The Grand Theater downtown was buzzing with activity as people streamed through the elegant doors. The marquee outside read Riverside Community Center Annual Charity Concert, in bold letters that could be seen from blocks away. Inside, the theater was filling up quickly. 500 seats, and it looked like they'd sell everyone. Eleanor stood backstage in the wings, watching through a gap in the curtain as people found their seats. She recognized the mayor in the 3rd row, sitting beside what looked like members of the city council. Local business owners in expensive suits chatted with Arts Council representatives. A photographer from the newspaper was setting up near the front. This was bigger than she'd expected. Much bigger, nervous. Eleanor turned to see Lily standing beside her, already in her performance dress. The young woman was scheduled to play Chopin early in the program. A little, Eleanor admitted with a smile. It's been a while since I performed for an audience this size. Lily looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor had the strangest feeling that the girl knew something. But Lily just smiled back and said, "You'll be wonderful. I know you will." Before Eleanor could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the backstage chatter. "Everyone, places, please. We're starting in 5 minutes." The performance space backstage became organized chaos. Students adjusted their clothes. Teachers gave last-minute pep talks, and someone was frantically looking for rosin for a violin bow. Eleanor stayed out of the way, sitting quietly on a chair in the corner. She wore the same simple navy dress she'd worn to her husband's funeral 5 years ago. Her hair was in its usual bun. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a modest volunteer doing her best. The lights in the theater dimmed, and the audience settled into their seats. Victoria walked onto the stage in a stunning red gown, her smile bright and confident. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our annual charity concert. Tonight, you'll witness the incredible talent we're nurturing here at the Riverside Community Center. All proceeds will go toward providing scholarships for students who can't afford music lessons." The audience applauded warmly. The concert began. One by one, students took the stage. Some were nervous, hitting wrong notes and rushing through passages. Others were confident, their youth and enthusiasm shining through every measure. The audience was generous with their applause, especially when the younger children performed. The teachers performed too. Victoria played a technically perfect rendition of a Beethoven sonata. James did a lovely interpretation of a Schubert impromptu. Peter played a showy piece by Liszt that brought the audience to their feet. Backstage, Eleanor watched it all. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. She'd done this thousands of times before, though it had been years since the last time. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of performances, Victoria returned to the stage for the final introduction. And now, for our last performance of the evening, we have something a bit different. Eleanor Chen is a volunteer who joined us just 2 months ago. She's been an absolute blessing to our program, helping with everything from organizing sheet music to making the best coffee any of us have ever tasted. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. When we asked all staff members to contribute a performance, Eleanor surprised us by choosing one of the most demanding pieces in the piano repertoire. Now I'll be honest, we were a bit concerned. More laughter, a little nervous now. But Eleanor insisted, and we support ambition here at Riverside. So please give a warm welcome to Eleanor Chen, performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. The applause was polite but thin. Some people looked confused. Others exchanged glances that clearly said they expected this to be painful to watch. Eleanor walked onto the stage. The spotlight was bright and warm. The Steinway grand piano sat there waiting, its surface gleaming. Eleanor could see the faces in the front rows. The mayor looked polite but distracted. A woman in the second row was already checking her phone. Backstage, James leaned toward Victoria and whispered, "Should we have the curtain ready to close quickly if this goes badly?" Victoria nodded, her expression tight. "I feel terrible. We never should have challenged her. This is going to be humiliating for her." Eleanor reached the piano and sat down on the bench. She adjusted it slightly. Exactly the way she'd adjusted piano benches 10,000 times before. She looked at the keys for a moment, her weathered hands resting gently on her lap. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Concerto No. 3 rolled out into the theater like thunder and silk combined. The change in the audience was instant. Heads snapped up. Phone screens went dark. The woman in the second row's mouth fell open. Eleanor's hands moved across the keys with stunning precision. The opening was powerful, commanding, filled with the kind of authority that comes only from absolute mastery. Her fingers flew through passages that most pianists spent months perfecting, making them sound effortless, natural, like breathing. Backstage, Victoria grabbed James's arm. "Oh my God. That's not possible," James whispered, his face pale. The students crowded into the wings to watch. Lily was smiling, tears already forming in her eyes because she'd known what was coming. Eleanor played on. The music swelled and softened, thundered and whispered. Her fingers danced through impossible runs. Chords that required massive handspans rang out perfectly. The melody soared above the complexity, clear and beautiful and heartbreaking. This wasn't someone attempting a difficult piece. This wasn't even someone playing it well. This was mastery. This was artistry at the highest possible level. Every note was exactly where it should be, weighted perfectly, timed with precision that seemed almost superhuman. The audience sat in stunned silence, no longer breathing normally, completely transported. The mayor leaned forward in his seat, his mouth hanging open. The photographer had stopped taking pictures and was just watching. A woman in the balcony had tears streaming down her face. Victoria felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. She watched Eleanor's hands, barely visible from this distance but clearly in total command. Every assumption she'd made, every condescending comment, every pitying look, crashed down on her with crushing weight. "Who is she?" Peter whispered. "Who is she really?" Lily pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She opened the video she'd found weeks ago and held it up for the others to see. The young Eleanor from 1985 performing this exact piece at the Van Cliburn competition. "Eleanor Chen," Lily whispered. "First prize winner. Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. Professor at Juilliard for 23 years. She's performed with the New York Philharmonic, the London Symphony, orchestras all over the world. She's recorded 15 albums. She's one of the greatest pianists of her generation." Victoria couldn't speak. She just stared at the phone screen, then back at the stage where Eleanor played on. Her simple dress and modest appearance completely at odds with the magnificent sound filling the theater. The piece built toward its climax. Eleanor's face showed deep concentration, but also something else. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. This was why she'd started playing piano as a child, before the competitions and the pressure and the fame. This feeling of connection between her hands and the keys, between the music and her soul. The final section was brutally fast, requiring extraordinary technique and stamina. Eleanor's hands never faltered. Notes cascaded like waterfalls, powerful and delicate simultaneously. The theater felt too small to contain the sound, and then the final chord. Eleanor struck it with perfect force, letting it ring out into the sudden silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. The entire audience sat frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Then someone in the balcony stood up. Then another person. Then the whole first row rose to their feet. Within seconds, all 500 people were standing, applauding so loudly it sounded like thunder. People were crying. The photographer was frantically snapping pictures. The mayor was clapping so hard his hands had to hurt. Eleanor stood and bowed, that same gentle smile on her face, slightly embarrassed by the reaction. She looked so normal standing there, so humble, that the contrast with what they'd just heard made it even more incredible. The applause went on and on. 2 minutes, 3. People started shouting, "Bravo!" The standing ovation stretched to 5 minutes, then 6. Eleanor bowed again, clearly overwhelmed. Backstage, Victoria was crying. James had his hand over his mouth. Peter kept shaking his head in disbelief. "We treated her like she didn't know anything," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "We gave her the hardest piece as a joke. We laughed at her." Lily touched her arm gently. "But she showed us anyway." "That's the point." Finally, after 7 full minutes of applause, Eleanor left the stage. She walked into the wings where everyone stood waiting, not knowing what to say. Victoria stepped forward, tears still streaming down her face. "Eleanor, I don't even know where to begin." Eleanor looked at all of them. The teachers who'd condescended to her, the students who'd whispered about her, everyone who'd made assumptions based on her appearance and age. "It's all right," she said softly. "Really, it's all right, but they all knew it wasn't, not yet." There was so much to say, so much to explain, so much to make right. The backstage area had emptied out. Most of the students and their families had gone home, still buzzing with excitement about what they'd witnessed. The theater staff was cleaning up the main hall, folding programs and sweeping the aisles. But in the small green room behind the stage, Eleanor sat on an old couch while Victoria and James sat across from her, both looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Victoria's mascara had run from crying. She'd tried to fix it but given up. James kept running his hand through his hair, a nervous habit Eleanor had noticed before. "I need to apologize," Victoria said finally, her voice thick. "Properly apologize. What I did was cruel. I gave you that piece thinking you'd fail. I don't even know what I wanted. To put you in your place, maybe? To show you that music is serious and not something you can just dabble in." She pressed her hands to her face. "God, I sound like such a terrible person." "You're not a terrible person," Eleanor said gently. "You're passionate about music. You care about your program. Those are good things. But I treated you like you were nobody, like your contributions didn't matter just because you weren't a teacher." Victoria looked up, her eyes red. "And all along you were one of the greatest pianists in the world. You've forgotten more about music than I'll ever know." James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Why didn't you tell us? When you first arrived, you could have mentioned your background. We would have welcomed you differently." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands. They were older now, the skin loose and spotted, but they still worked. They'd carried her through that performance without any problems. "5 years ago, my husband died," she said softly. "David was a violinist. We met at Juilliard when we were young. He understood the pressure of that world, the constant performances, the travel, the expectations. We lived through it together for 40 years. She smiled, but it was sad. When he died, I realized I didn't want that life anymore. I'd been Eleanor Chen, the pianist, for so long that I'd forgotten how to just be Eleanor. Does that make sense? Yes, Victoria whispered. I retired from Juilliard, sold our apartment in New York. I wanted to go somewhere small and quiet where nobody knew my name, where I could volunteer and help people without anyone expecting me to be anything special. Eleanor looked at them both. I wasn't hiding exactly. I just wanted a fresh start. But we made assumptions, James said. We saw your age, your clothes, the way you carried yourself, and we decided you couldn't possibly have anything valuable to offer musically. Everyone makes assumptions. It's human nature. Eleanor's voice was kind but firm. But yes, the assumptions stung sometimes. Not because I needed you to know who I was, but because you didn't seem to think I could be anyone at all. Victoria wiped her eyes again. When I handed you that Rachmaninoff score, I was being cruel. I admit it. I wanted to embarrass you, to teach you some kind of lesson about knowing your limitations. She laughed bitterly. Turns out the lesson was for me. Maybe we both learned something, Eleanor said. Peter knocked on the doorframe. Sorry to interrupt, but there are people from the audience who want to meet you, Eleanor. The mayor, some donors, and a reporter from the newspaper. Eleanor sighed. I suppose I can't avoid it. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to, James said quickly. We can tell them you're tired. No, it's all right. This is good for your program. The publicity will help. Eleanor stood up, smoothing down her simple dress. Just promise me one thing? Anything, Victoria said. Tomorrow, when I come in to volunteer, let me still organize sheet music and clean the piano keys. I like doing those things. They're peaceful. Victoria started crying again. The next few weeks were strange for everyone. The newspaper ran a feature story with the headline, "World-Renowned Pianist Hiding in Plain Sight." The article included photos from the concert and old pictures of Eleanor from her performing days. Suddenly, everyone in town knew who she was. People started showing up at the community center hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Parents wanted their children to study with her. Other music programs called offering prestigious teaching positions with generous salaries. Eleanor politely declined everything. She continued volunteering on her regular schedule, arriving at 9 in the morning and leaving in the afternoon. She still made coffee. She still organized sheet music. She still cleaned piano keys, but things had changed too. Victoria and James treated her with deep respect now, but it was different from before. It was genuine. They asked her opinion on programming choices. They invited her to listen to student lessons and offer feedback. When she made a suggestion, they actually listened. The students were different too. At first, they were shy around her, almost scared. But Eleanor had a gift for putting people at ease. She'd sit in on practice sessions and offer gentle advice. Try using your third finger here instead, she'd say. Feel how much smoother that is? Lily became especially close to her. The young woman would stay after her lessons to talk, and Eleanor found herself sharing stories from her performing days that she hadn't thought about in years. Why did you really choose to perform that piece? Lily asked one afternoon. They were sitting in the main rehearsal hall drinking tea. Honestly, because Victoria's condescension reminded me of something I'd promised myself a long time ago. Eleanor smiled. When I was young, people made assumptions about me too. I was Asian, I was a woman, I was small. Conductors would see me and think I couldn't handle the powerful pieces. They wanted to give me the delicate Mozart, the pretty Chopin. But you wanted to play Rachmaninoff. I wanted to play everything, and I didn't want anyone telling me I couldn't based on how I looked. Eleanor sipped her tea. So when Victoria handed me that score, expecting me to fail, something in me said, not this time. 3 months after the concert, the community center held a small ceremony. They'd received a huge donation from one of the audience members that night, enough to fund scholarships for 20 students. Victoria stood at a podium in the rehearsal hall with Eleanor beside her. We're calling it the Eleanor Chen Scholarship Fund, Victoria announced to the gathered students and teachers, in honor of the woman who taught us all an important lesson about humility, assumptions, and recognizing greatness in unexpected places. Eleanor tried to protest, but everyone applauded. She accepted gracefully, giving a short speech about the importance of music education and giving everyone a chance, regardless of their background. After the ceremony, Eleanor found herself back in practice room 3. She sat at the piano looking at the keys. In the past 3 months, she'd started teaching a small master class on Saturday mornings. Just 8 students, all serious about their music. She'd also started playing again, not for audiences, but for herself. Victoria knocked on the doorframe. Mind if I come in? Please. Victoria sat on the bench beside Eleanor. They'd become friends in the months since the concert, though it had taken time to work through the awkwardness and guilt. I've been thinking, Victoria said, about that night, about how wrong I was. Victoria, we've talked about this. I know, but I want to say something else. Victoria turned to face her. You could have told us off. You could have been angry or vindictive. Instead, you handled everything with grace. Even now, you still volunteer. You still organize sheet music and clean piano keys. You didn't let what happened change who you are. Eleanor smiled. Those tasks need doing. Why shouldn't I do them? Because you're Eleanor Chen. You've played for presidents and queens. You've taught at Juilliard. You've won every major piano competition there is. And I've also found joy in simpler things. Eleanor played a few soft notes on the piano. For 40 years, I was always Eleanor Chen, the pianist. The pressure was constant. Every performance had to be perfect. Every student had to succeed. Every recording had to be brilliant. She looked at Victoria. Here I get to be just Eleanor. Yes, I teach now. Yes, people know who I am. But I also get to make coffee and clean pianos and help in small ways. That balance makes me happy. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You've taught me so much. Not just about music, but about people, about not judging based on appearances, about kindness. We all have something to learn from each other, Eleanor said. That's what makes life interesting. As the sun set through the windows, casting long shadows across the piano keys, Eleanor played something soft and beautiful. Not Rachmaninoff this time, just a simple melody, the kind she'd loved as a child. Victoria listened, and in that moment she understood. Greatness wasn't just about talent or achievement. It was about how you treated people, how you carried yourself, how you found joy in both the extraordinary and the ordinary. Eleanor had been playing piano for 60 years. She'd performed on the world's greatest stages, but some of her happiest moments now came from helping a nervous teenager find the right fingering for a difficult passage, or from the quiet satisfaction of a freshly organized music library. She'd come to this small town to disappear. Instead, she'd discovered that you can never truly escape who you are, but you can choose how you share that with the world. And sometimes the greatest performance isn't the one that wins competitions or fills concert halls. Sometimes it's the one that teaches people to look beyond the surface, to question their assumptions, and to recognize that extraordinary things can come in the most ordinary packages. Eleanor finished playing. Victoria hugged her, and in that small practice room, two women who'd started as strangers found something rare and valuable: genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and hard-won understanding. Outside, students were arriving for evening classes. The community center buzzed with activity, with music spilling from every room. Eleanor stood up, ready to help wherever she was needed, because that's what she'd come here to do. Not to prove anything, not to show off, just to be useful, to be kind, and to share the things she loved most with people who were learning to love it too. And in the end, that was more than enough.